Hello again, and welcome to Claris Engage 2020, our first Claris Engage and our first virtual event. I'm Rosemary Teege, Head of Community at Claris. And like Andrew, I measure my year in that interval from DevCon to DevCon, or now from Engage to Engage. It's where I meet with people that I've known for over 20 years and learn from all of you. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to our first session of Claris Engage, FileMaker 19 Under the Hood, led by Robert Holsey. But before we get started, I have a few tips to help you get the most out of the WebEx events experience. First, we recommend that you listen using your computer audio. If you have limited bandwidth, you can use the telephone numbers provided in the WebEx interface. If you hover at the bottom of the screen and click on the three dots, you can access the phone numbers under the audio connection settings. We've dropped the phone numbers and link to the international numbers for WebEx support into the chat. And the other thing is, if you're having some problems, try shutting down other applications that draw bandwidth. If you have any technical problems, please use those phone numbers to contact WebEx support. And one other note, we've disabled two-way chat from attendees so that they are not a distraction to our speakers today. I know you're going to have a lot of questions for our speakers, especially in this session. To ask a question, you can drop your question into the question box in the lower right section of your screen on the WebEx window. If the Q&A panel is not showing, you can expose it by clicking on the question mark bubble on the bottom of the WebEx window. In either case, please enter your questions and address it to me, Rosemary Teege, and I will forward it to Robert at the end of the session for him to answer. Last thing is, when we're in Q&A, we'll not be showing slides, and you can switch between grid view and single photo view by clicking on the little square icon in the upper right of your screen. And with that, I'm happy to introduce my good friend and colleague, Robert Holsey. Robert, the virtual microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Holsey. I am the Senior Product Manager here at Claris for the FileMaker clients and development tools. And I'm joined today by Todd Geist of Geist Interactive. Together, we're going to be discussing two of our most exciting new features for FileMaker 19, JavaScript integration and add-ons. We're going to begin by giving you an overview of what each of these features are and why we believe they're important. I will then turn over to Todd to give you a demonstration on how to create your own add-ons and share some examples of both add-ons and JavaScript integration. I will then come back and give you a peek into what's coming over the horizon for each of these features. And then we've dedicated as much time as possible to Q&A, where we will be joined by David McKee from our development team here at Claris, as well as Jeremy Brown from Geist Interactive. So first up, what is our JavaScript integration? Well, it's three main parts. The first is a new script step that allows you to trigger JavaScript functions directly from our scripting engine. So you'd be able to pass it parameters to call specific actions or pass it data. And then going in the other direction, a new JavaScript function that we created and made available to your code within a web viewer that allows you to then call FileMaker scripts directly from your JavaScript, again, passing it parameters to call specific actions and pass it data. The third and final piece is a new script step called Execute Data API. This is very similar to using the data API that you've been using in market for a while now, but this script step allows you to do the query even when the file is offline. And of course, this returns back to you the data that you queried in the form of a JSON object, which is really helpful for these JavaScript integrations since most libraries are looking for JSON. Just a quick interesting side note here. When we began working on our JavaScript integration, we didn't first conceive of the data API script step. It was through the feedback we received from all of you in the community in our ETS program, as well as working closely with Geist Interactive as we were building out this functionality, that we realized how helpful a script step like this would be to automatically return that JSON. So just calling that out as an example, when you hear us talking about being more iterative and more agile, this is a great example of how we're taking feedback from the community to drive better outcomes for our releases. Now, why should you care about JavaScript? Of course, you're all FileMaker developers. Well, I think a screen like this really speaks for itself. It's rich data visualizations and user experiences that are made possible by leveraging the literal thousands of JavaScript libraries that are out in the community. And this is one of many tools that we're providing you to modernize your FileMaker experience on the platform that you already know and love. Now, JavaScript specifically is interesting because there's just so many JavaScript developers. There's over 11 million of them worldwide. So this is a rich community that we can tap into. It's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in technology, making new libraries available, and a deep talent pool that we can start leveraging. And for those of you that are FileMaker developers, or internal FileMaker developers rather, it's very likely that you have colleagues within your organization that have JavaScript skills. They can begin working with you as you're building out your apps and your modern experiences. So just as a recap, why should we care about JavaScript? Well, again, it's going to facilitate beautiful modern app experiences that you can create by seamlessly integrating this JavaScript libraries. And again, there's a huge talent pool of JavaScript developers that are out in the world that we can start tapping into. Now, I do want to call out the fact that we fully realize that there's a percentage of you listening in right now that are thinking, yeah, the modern UI and experience is fantastic. I'd love to be able to incorporate that into my app. However, I don't have the time, nor do I have the budget to hire someone or learn JavaScript myself. It's important to note that we have you covered as well, and that actually brings us to our next feature, which is add-ons. So what are add-ons? Well, they're pre-configured bits of functionality built using all the power of the FileMaker platform. They're compartmentalized and easily shareable, both within your team, so that you're all developing using the same tools, or within the community, so placing these up on the marketplace or in our community forums. And then when you consume add-ons, they're just as simple as drag and drop. Grab something from the marketplace that performs a particular functionality. To integrate that into your app, you drag and drop it onto your layout. Behind the scenes, we're doing the heavy lifting, inserting any schema, scripts, layouts that are necessary. And it's really important to keep in mind that these come in all levels of complexity, right? So it could be things as simple as a star rating system that we've built with a button bar. You know, we've all built something like this countless times. Now this can be turned into an add-on that we can just simply drag and drop into our app. Maybe there's other similar star rating systems around the marketplace that have more bells and whistles that we can leverage as well. Or there's something a little bit more complex. Let's say that you need to use insert from URL to talk to a web-based API. Well, that's something that you can do with a platform, but is out of the reach of some of us within the community. Well, that functionality can then be bundled up into an add-on to do things like credit card processing, and all I have to do to leverage it is drag it into my app. Coming back to our JavaScript examples, we could take a JavaScript library, embed it into an experience like a Kanban board you're seeing here on screen, turn that into an add-on, and then I can leverage that JavaScript-based interface without writing a single line of JavaScript. I just map it to my existing data in my app, and I'm off running. And then at sort of the high end of the spectrum, look at something like Seed Code Calendar, who's already created an add-on. This is a really complex calendar. I mean, it's an app sort of in and of itself, but you can now easily integrate into your app just by installing it as an add-on. So why do we care about add-ons? Well, as you saw from those examples, we now have building blocks. We're not creating our apps piece by piece any longer. We're going out, grabbing add-ons from the community, snapping them together, and much more rapidly developing our app, focusing on the problem and not the how in the technology on how to solve it. Add-ons do something else that's really important, though, and that's taking and capturing what the wizards of the people like the Todd guys that are constantly pushing the boundaries of what the platform is capable of, bundling that up into an add-on and making it available to all of us across all levels, all skill levels. So if you're someone that's brand new to the platform, you're a no-coder, you're just trying to solve a problem, you need something like a Kanban board, you go and grab that as an add-on, drag it into your app, use it as is, and you're off running. Or you may start digging in under the covers and start modifying the scripts and adding your own logic or changing the layout. So you do some level of low coding there, all the way to eventually maybe even reverse engineering some of these add-ons and understanding how their inner workings are. So that helps you sort of build up your own skills, and then you can start contributing your own add-ons to the community. So again, why do we care about add-ons? Well, first off, it facilitates a rapid app development that we really have not seen on the platform in the past. And it unlocks the full power of the platform so that anyone, regardless of skill level, is able to wield it. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're really excited to see some of this in action. So what I'd like to do now is turn things over to Todd to walk you through how to create your own add-ons and share some examples. So take it away, Todd.
Right. Thanks very much, Robert. Really excited to be here. To be talking about a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of add-ons. I've got a lot to cover and not a tremendous amount of time. Excuse me. And I don't have any feedback, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. And just know that at the end of this, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll also have a lot of links for you that have more detailed information and more in-depth information about some of how this stuff works. So looking at our agenda, we're going to look at these features that Robert mentioned a little bit more detail, look at a couple of examples, and then we're going to eventually end up building an add-on. Once we decide what to do, what it's supposed to do and how it works, we're going to build an add-on and do all that stuff live and kind of get into the weeds a little bit on how that works. So Robert already mentioned a lot of this stuff, but I do think it's important to reiterate add-ons and JavaScript are separate features. JavaScript is for coding and for logic and for that pro level, and add-ons are a way to deliver that stuff down the chain to the low code or no code levels. But I think it's important to recognize, this is one of the things that's important to me, is that on any given day or any given time, I'm either a pro load or no coder, and that just depends on what I'm doing or what time of day it is. My goal always is to take complex code that's at that pro level and to bundle it up and make it available to me even later at a low code level or even all the way out to a no code level. And we'll get into a little bit about what I mean there. But this isn't about different people necessarily getting to play it, being at different levels in the stack. It's even about individuals using code at different levels, pro, low, or no. So we're going to start by talking about the Execute FileMaker Data API. So Robert mentioned this. This is a new feature that got added as part of our development cycle. So I want to detail a little bit more about what that does. Robert mentioned some of the things. It's about querying data so you can get data from anywhere in your system without having to leave. So if you're on a layout and you need to get some data from another layout, you don't actually have to go anywhere to get it. You can just make a query, and it handles its own context. So you don't need to go to that layout and do a find. You can just do the query and get back the data as JSON. It's also important to know that this is, as Robert said, it works offline, so it doesn't require a server, and therefore it doesn't use the data API quota. Even when it's on a server, it will never use your API quota. It's only going to use, it's not going to use the HTTP server at all. It also includes more metadata, and we're going to talk about that actually a little bit. It includes more metadata than is available through any other means, and it's useful even without JavaScript. And in fact, the add-on that we build today that will use this feature won't use JavaScript at all. So when I mean metadata, what I'm talking about is information about tables, layouts, and fields that might be in the system, either scripts. There's lots of different things that you might want to know about the system if you want to take something that's fairly complex and make it simpler, like move it down that chain towards low code or no code. The code that you write may need to be a little smarter about where it is, and so that's what getting metadata is all about. And so this script step actually gets more data than you can get through the design functions on certain things, and more data than you can get through the server data API. And this is useful for building a configurator, which is what I call it, and we'll look at that in a little bit, but also just this idea of being able to read what's around you in the data in the file you're in and be able to respond to that using techniques like indirection. So set field by name or go to layout by name, etc. So let's demo the data API. And actually, I want to do this way, and execute data API. So this is a file that Clay Mackel actually started. And in it, it's got the requests that different kinds of requests that you can make. Oops, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And you can see, we'll just look at this, zoom in a little bit. I hope the zoom works. I'm assuming it does. This is the request field, and this is the result field. And so we're simply passing the request to that script step, and we're going to store the result in the result field, and that is going to be set into this field. So that's really all there is in this file. And in the file, I've included a bunch of examples of just sort of the different things that you can do. So here is a query to get data from anywhere in your app. In this case, we're getting data from a layout full data. So this part right here is normal FileMaker server data API stuff. So that's the normal kind of query that you make. This part here, this layouts part, is new, and that is how you target or give the context that you want to run this query on to the script step. Yes, it does say layouts, and you're only using one layout. That's a little confusing, but just for the time being, know that we're really only talking about a single layout here. So that's for data, but we can also get metadata. So there's another keyword action, and if you give it metadata as its value and pass it an empty string for layouts, you're going to get all of the layouts listed in the file, including folder names and whether they're nested inside of folders. And really awesome is this right here. You can actually get the table that the layout is bound to. So there's no way to do that without this script step in any other FileMaker, any other function or methodology. You cannot get the table that a layout is based on without being on the layout itself. So that's really powerful. We can also get that same kind of deal, but for not just for layouts, but for data tables, for tables themselves. And so you can get back the name of the table occurrence, the base table, etc. You can target specific layouts by putting in, instead of an empty string here, you put in the name of the layout, and you get all of the field data on that layout. So there's the field metadata, all the information about it, how it's used on the layout. And you also get valueless portal data and the table name as well. So it really gives you a lot of rich information about that layout. And you get the same kind of thing for tables, so you can target individual tables. There's a few other things in here which I'm going to skip over, but this file will be available. You can download and download it and play with it to understand more of its features. All right, so let's see. We're going to get back to the presentation here. All right, so now on to the integration. Robert already talked about these things, so we're going to look at the JavaScript, perform JavaScript in WebViewer, and the extension that gets added to a JavaScript app that is running within that is running within your FileMaker app. It's helpful to think of the FileMaker app as the host application, and the little thing that's running in your WebViewer being an embedded application. And so we'll use that terminology a few more times in this presentation. So another way to state this is that another way to look at this is to think about a two-way channel here. So we've got our hosted FileMaker application can use this script step to call a specific function. And you can see that function written out here in the script inside of the web viewer. And you can pass it data in the form of parameters. And then that function or another function in JavaScript can call that perform script. And it can say, run the script hello, and pass it the string world. It's important to understand that the data you're passing back and forth between the host app and the embedded web viewer is always a string. So there's no way to pass binary or anything else. It's going to be a string. So oftentimes we're going to use JSON, which is a structured string. And that's because both JavaScript and FileMaker can parse and handle JSON quite well. So it's very common to use JSON for this. So let's jump into a quick demo of that. So I've got a data tables integration here. We're going to load the data and just take a look at this. It looks kind of like a portal, but unlike a portal, you can drag the columns around. You can click and sort. You can even group the rows, right? So that's kind of nice. And when you double click on a row, this actually is running a script which is opening up a card window, and that is focused on the record that you clicked on. So this is using both of those features to call into the file to load the data. So we're sending the data into the web viewer, and then when we double click, we're calling out to run a script. So briefly, let's take a look at how that's done. First, we're building the HTML here inside of a calculation. You can see it here. We've got two fields involved. One is our HTML, and then another which is our JavaScript, and we're combining those with a substitute. And if we look at this in browse mode, we'll see what the HTML looks like. This is it. So all this top part is simply loading stuff off of the internet. So that's all the data tables libraries and all of its dependencies. And then this is pretty much, I just copied most of this from the data tables documentation. And then here, I'm going to do that substitute, and I'm going to substitute in this JavaScript. So this is the entirety of the JavaScript that I needed to write to make that data tables integration work. And most of this was just copy and pasted from the integration, from the documentation itself. So we zoom in here, you can see at the top I've got this load data, and that's the function that we're going to call, and that's going to load the data into the library. And then down here at the bottom, I've got this perform script down here, which is where we've added a double click event to the table row, which is what we're doing here. And we're calling on double click row, the FileMaker script on double click row, and we're passing it the JSON version of the record data that's stored in there. So that is pretty much the full bit of the integration. Let's just take a quick look at how that actually looks when we're going to run this. So let's try to do this. Well, instead of doing that, let's do let's run this with debugger on so you get to see. And we'll step in and let me bring up the data viewer so you can kind of watch this happen. So here we are building the data API request, so you can see what that looks like. It's very simple, just customers layout, and we're just limiting to 500. That's all we care about for this demo. Stepping through to this next step where I'm passing that data API request to the execute FileMaker data API script step, and I'm targeting that result field. Then we're going to do a little bit of parsing here, and we're going to end up with our JSON to send in a variable right here. And then we're going to call perform JavaScript in web viewer using the object name, the web viewer itself, load data, that function we just looked at, and we're going to pass in that data. Is really all there is to it. Not much more. And that's just a quick look at looking at how you can build an integration with JavaScript and FileMaker with or without add-ons. So you could then further take this and bundle it up into an add-on if you want, or you could just use this as a custom integration for any app that you want to build. Okay. How are we doing here? Good. Okay, so two-way communication, execute FileMaker data API for data queries. We looked at that. Windows. So one thing I do need to note about Windows is we are currently still using Internet Explorer on the Windows PC platform. I think Robert will have some news about that at the end of the session, hopefully. And but for the currently, that's what we're left with. So if you're building JavaScript, you're going to have to build it to run on Internet Explorer if you want it to work on the whole platform. Because the rest of these features, everything works across the whole platform, by the way. But you do need to write sort of an older style JavaScript or transpile newer JavaScript down to an older style to make that work. That is beyond the scope of this conversation, but there's more information about that available elsewhere. All right, so how to build an add-on. So from a high level, you're going to design a file with the features you want. So the thing that you want to get installed is going to be built in the file. And pretty much everything within that file is going to get installed. So you don't want extra things in there. You only want the stuff that you're going to want to get installed in there. And that's really it. There's security groups do not come over, and certain layouts don't come over, and we'll talk about exactly how that works. When you set up the file with a couple of guidelines that will help determine what layouts, what groups get installed to do the things that actually get dragged onto a layout. Pretty much everything else will get installed into that file. So you need to know that. And then finally, you're going to run this script. You're going to run save as add-on package, which is a script step, which we will look at in detail, and that will generate the add-on for you. That is really, at a high level, that's how it works. So we're going to look at a picker add-on that I call the GI picker add-on that I built for this. And it's for building these search and pick interfaces that you might want to, say, pick a product from a product catalog and put it on an order or an invoice, or pick a customer from your customer list. And this one's not going to use JavaScript, but it is going to use some complex scripting and behaviors that are relatively advanced for a FileMaker person to do. So that's that pro-level scripting. And then we're going to make it customizable so that you can use your low-level skills, kind of that low-code skills, to tweak it and change it. And then we're going to go the extra yard and make it all the way out to configurable so that it's easy to use for people that that are just getting started. So let's take a look. So we're going to go in reverse here a little bit. I want to show the thing that we're actually targeting here, like what it is that we're going to be going for in terms of behavior, before we dive into how it gets installed and how it gets built. Just because I think it's hard to know and abstract what we're building until you actually see it. So this is a picker, and this is actually the add-on that gets installed. And you can see I've already got it installed. And if I drag on another button, you can see it does drop that in. We'll get to that part in a minute, but let's look at how this works now that it's actually installed and running. So I want to be able to find a customer for this invoice, right? So I've got customers and invoice with some line items. Pretty simple app, not a lot to it. So I click the button and I get this nice interface. Now let me turn on keyboard watching so you can see that I'm using the arrow keys and the tab keys to do this. Now to build this, you need to use on layout triggers, on layout keystroke triggers. And this can get a little tricky. It takes some fiddling. It's a lot of fiddly bits. I don't want to have to relearn it every time. So obviously I'd like to take this, turn it into an add-on so that I don't have to rediscover how all those behaviors work. And I just get to create it once. I can choose the item I want. I can do some filtering, right? I can do filtering on that. I can select the item and I can click enter or return, and we get that picking to work. And the low code aspect is I got to design this part of the layout exactly the way that I wanted it here. And I didn't have to worry about this behaviors. That was taken care of for me. I can use escape to cancel even. And here's another one where I can design a different picker, but still getting the same behaviors, right? And we can get the water bottle installed there. So that is really the behaviors that I'm after. And now, as I said, I want to make this into something that is configurable and also customizable. And we'll get into those details in a second here, but I want to set the stage a little bit here by talking about something to notice when I dragged on this item. So if we look at the script parameter here, you see this string that looks like a UUID, and in fact it is, right? And if you look at another one, I changed the icon there. We won't worry about that for now. We get a different UUID. You see how that works? A little bit different. And if I drag on a new version and drop it, I'm going to get a different UUID. So part of what happens when you install add-ons is when you drag them onto a layout is there's a tag in the XML that gets replaced with a unique identifier. And that unique identifier is what allows me to make these things behave differently. And the way that works is if we click on this and bring up the configurator. Now I shift clicked on that to bring up the configurator. And here's where I tell it how to bind to the underlying layout. So I'm saying this configurator here, connect to the foreign key client field on the invoices table, which is going to eventually drive the name that shows up there. And then for the layout that shows up when I do the picker, pick this client picker layout, and that's going to be able to then, as you notice here, I can get the field, I get all this metadata, right? Just by opening up this picker, I'm using that execute data API to get the metadata about what tables and fields and layouts are installed in the system. So I can make this really nice configurator that lets somebody configure a button to work with any of the layouts that have been designed as pickers. Okay, and then one last thing. So how are we doing that? So once I have this, once I have this this identifier here, open up this window. You notice that there's this table, there's a table called config, GI picker, and then there's a config store. And we're just using JSON to store the data. And this is where I get into that indirection kind of thing about when I click this button, when I click this button here, C1B blah, 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 it's going to look for this entry. And using JSON function is going to pull out what key fields to bind to, what layouts to use, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we take it all the way down to a no-code experience. And that's how that works. So let me do the next step, which is to look at what happens when we install this and how we go to. So that's kind of the no-code experience and kind of how it looks. So let's take go a little bit farther in, say, how we might do this, doing an installation in low code. Is I'm going to pick from my add-ons tab the picker. I'm going to install it. And then I'm going to drag it in, drop it in, and then it's going to work, but it's going to work on an example layout, which doesn't help me too much here. But if I look at, actually, let me step back one step and undo this. So you can see uninstall. You see everything was removed, which is really great. So if I look at the layouts here, you'll see I've got this many layouts. I've got just a few scripts in here, one script, and not too much. So when I click this button and I select that and install it, I'm now going to get all of the scripts that are involved in that nice behavior that we had, right? And so now, another thing is I've got a layout in here in this folder that got installed that's called README. And in the README, I can look at some information about how I might want to use this thing. Gives me some hints about how to redesign layouts if I want to use different layouts. So let's do that really quickly here. I'm going to drag this out. And I'm going to, after reading the README, I know that what I want to do is duplicate this layout. That's the example picker. That's this one that shows up there, the example picker. And I want to duplicate that. We're going to change it to use the clients table, change it to clients, client picker. So that's its new name. And then I really just have to do one thing. Now I could go to town on this layout if I want to and make it look anything I want. But in this case, all I'm going to do is redirect the display to the name of the company. And now I have all that behavior working. So now I've got the arrow keys working, the tab keys, all that stuff is working fine. And if I go to here and shift click, I can now say, all right, on the invoice, let me bind to the foreign key for the client. Let me pick that client picker and let me pick its primary key. Save that configuration. And now I've got all that great behavior working just the way it did before. All right, so I can do a type ahead, I can pick the field, and it all works. So that's an example of now we're sort of in that low code range where I can redesign that layout to look anywhere that I want. And that is kind of everything that I built, okay? And to get it to install. So now I think I have a couple of slides before we actually build that thing. Talk about just quickly so the couple things to know is that when you install, that's when all the elements are installed, and when you drag and drop, that's when this XML when this tag gets replaced, this UUID, and that's actually the string that gets that you can place anywhere in the layout, anywhere in the control group that you want to be dragged on from the left. Anything that's going to be dragged in, if it has that tag in it, will get replaced with the same UUID. So that means if you have multiple controls and you want them to be able to know, like, hey, I'm part of the same instance, then you can use this tag to do that. And now the user can interact with that add-on at that point. Right? So those are the events that happen really too. Install gets the elements installed, drag and drop does this tag replacement. Okay. And then, all right. So then in a little more detail, so you're going to design your whole file. We've chosen to design it with a configurator. You don't necessarily have to do that. But again, if you want to go all the way out to the no code, that's what you have to do. I think Robert's got some more details on what might be coming in that area. But that's what we're doing for now, is building these configurators. You create the layouts with language specific names, and we'll look at what that means, but that is basically around targeting different languages so that when you install an add-on with, say, Spanish language as opposed to English, you'll get different layouts that will have the code that gets installed. Group the controls you want to be dragged on, use the tag, and then we're gonna run this script, and that's really it. The important thing to know is after you do this save copy as add-on package, you do need to quit and restart FileMaker for that to take effect and to be able to use that add-on next. All right, let's build it. Building's actually fairly easy, so this won't take very long. But I do want to point out the different things that happen here. And before I do, I want to point out that the add-ons, when they get installed currently, are going to end up in this folder, which is in your extensions folder, add-on modules. And that is the picker one that we've already got installed. So I'm going to remove that, just drop it out on my layout here, and I'm going to quit my FileMaker 19, and I'm going to reboot with here it is, GI Picker add-on. So this is the layout that contains my object that's going to get installed onto as the drag and drop object. Notice I have named it with this specific name here. All right. These are all the layouts that I'm including. I like to include it inside of a folder. And this part, this FileMaker add-on template directives, preceded by 2 underscores and then a dash, and then the language code follows it. So this is what determines which layout will be used for that drag-on object. And so this gives you the ability to respond differently to different languages based on how you might need to lay out the controls that you're adding or whatnot. Now, when the thing that gets dragged on can be any number of FileMaker elements grouped together. In this case, I'm only doing a button because it's very simple in this case, but you can imagine a tab panel and a nav bar and a whole bunch of things that you might want to be installed as one thing. They need to be grouped, and they need to be the only thing that's grouped on this layout. Okay, that's the key takeaway there. And one little hint is if you want to do just a button, which actually turns out to be a fairly nice kind of integration, is just to have a button you drag on that then goes and does something else. You will need to do this trick, because if you make a button, that button will not be groupable if it's by itself, right? You cannot group it. So what you want to do is just quickly, in just little trick, just create a square, add it, then you can group it, and then you can go to objects, look at that group, and just delete that rectangle. And now you've got a grouped object, and that will actually work. And that's what I've done here. So that group is there. And that button is the button that we're going to get installed. And then looking at the script parameter, here is that tag that we talked about. Okay. So this, whenever this button gets dragged onto a layout, this will get replaced with a UUID. Checking my time here. We got just enough time. The rest of this is all of the example that I built. So here is the code for that example. It's got the script set up the way that I want. It's got the script triggers set up on this layout. So if we go to here and look at script triggers, it's all set up. So this will all get installed as is. So everything else in here will get installed just the way that we want. The only difference is on this layout, the rest of this stuff on here, this layout will not get installed. Only this object, which will create that add-on group, will get put into your system. So what we typically do is we'll have some demo stuff on here. Like I want to make sure this whole thing works, so I can see that it's actually changing the bound field here, and I can test out my configurator with the shift click to do all this kind of stuff, right? And then I can have this save as add-on package as a single step script, a single step button on the script, because I don't really want this script to be included. Like I wouldn't want to run this script step as a script, because then it would get installed with my add-on. So if I don't want something to be installed, I want to do it like simply like this, where I'm just saying save a copy as add-on package, which is a script step, giving it the current window, and we'll have some information on the UUID issue, replacing UUIDs, and the documentation in a little bit. That's it. I'm going to save that as, click it, and what happens is it opens up the window and it shows you all the data that's in there. So this is everything that gets put in, including some preview images and some icons, etc. And then there's, you can see these language-based files. And if we look at, one of them, you'll see this is just the part of it that has who the attribution is, who it is that created it. So you want to change these things. And there's a few others you want to change, and you want to give it some icons, etc. In the interest of time, I've already got those created here, and I'm just going to drag those in so we get our nice experience. Apply to all and replace. I think I missed one. Let me do that. Place. Okay, so those are now in there. So I'm going to quit, and I am going to quit FileMaker and then grab my one final file here and just show it over here on the left. And double click it, and there it is. And there's the whole thing built and working just like it was before. So that is a quick run through of how to build these add-ons using basic FileMaker techniques. We didn't use any JavaScript there or anything like that. We just used FileMaker. And let's go back, and I think we're about done. I think I must have quit the presentation. Let's open that up. Just a couple of follow-ups here. No ways to modify existing schema yet. We can create relationships. It's fairly simple. So we've got some information on that. I'll give you the links for that in a second. We like to use indirection because we can't really hardwire into the schema that's there. You want to use those metadata functions to grab stuff and get things working using indirection and context independent kind of techniques. Configuration is a really nice way to get things down to a low code level. We've got some documentation that covers more of the details on internationalization, creating relationships, and avoiding UUID collisions. All that documentation is up on our website. It may be odd that it's up there. Again, this feature is in preview. It's not, the add-on creation is in preview. Using add-ons is not. That's supported, but creation is. And so we've written all the documentation, the temporary documentation for preview. It's up on our website. You can get it all there. And there's also another link to a JavaScript webinar I did a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, with Claris, and that is there as well. And I think that's it. So with that, Robert, I will turn it over to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Todd. That was awesome. I really appreciate working with you guys and providing that documentation. It's been awesome seeing the community already jump on and creating add-ons. So as exciting as all that is where we are today. Of course, we're not slowing down. We've got more on the horizon. And in the very near future, we're going to be releasing 9 new add-ons that are JavaScript based. They cover cases such as Kanban boards, activity timelines, even a calendar. And if you're a FileMaker 19 owner, you will get these add-ons as part of a free update in the coming weeks. Now, looking out a little bit farther onto our roadmap, before I start listing these items off, normal caveats. What you're about to see, we're not making any guarantees that we're going to ship them, when they're going to ship them, or the order in which we'll. These are all things that are top of mind for us right now. And what's important for you to understand is that these are things that we've identified based on feedback, both from our external testing program, so folks that we're getting in and looking at the features early, but also just since May. As mentioned, we've already got folks creating add-ons, building in JavaScript integrations. We're taking that feedback, and that's what's driving the items on our roadmap. So the first of which here is support or removing the reliance on IE11 on Windows. As Todd mentioned earlier, in market today, we're still using IE11. Everyone is muted still, but I'm hearing the applause for our Windows customers. We know this is something that you've really been looking forward for us to do for a while now. And with the JavaScript integration, we really want to make sure that we simplify the JavaScript that you have to write as developers, as well as provide a consistent experience as the consumers that are leveraging your JavaScript across all of our clients. Now we're also working on a new guided experience for creating add-ons. So Todd just walked you through the developer preview script step and how to do that with special naming conventions and rules that you have to follow to make sure that the objects you want to drag and drop onto the layout come over smoothly. But we want to really make this a really simple process so that everyone in the community can start contributing and creating their own add-ons, which they then share with our marketplace. So we want to integrate the marketplace both from a add-on creation standpoint, so it's really easy to get those up there, shareable, as well as when you're in the development tools, easy access to those add-ons so that you can start leveraging them as you build. And then finally, this one is a little high level, but this speaks to our ultimate vision of add-ons. We truly want these to be seamless, install, and configurable, meaning that when you drag the add-on in, things like the theme that the add-on is using automatically maps to the theme that your app is using. And when you're doing configuration, so like Todd was showing how to map fields, instead of that being in a configurator window like he showed, having that actually be part of our inspector so that you would be integrating these add-ons and changing the settings for them just like you would any other layout object. And part of that would be mapping to existing schema or potentially even creating new schema that add-on requires. Okay, so again, this is not the definitive list of what we're working on. This is going to be based on the feedback that we hear from the community, but these are the top of mind items at the moment. So with that, we've got the remainder of time for Q&A. As a reminder, again, we're being joined by David McKee. He was the lead engineer for add-ons, as well as Jeremy Brown from Geist Interactive, who worked very closely with us in building those JavaScript-based add-ons that I just mentioned. So with that, we'll turn it over to Q&A. So if I can ask the panelists to share your screen. I'm sorry, share your camera. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment here. Everyone's on? Awesome. So I've got a bunch of questions here. We won't be able to get through them all, but I'm going to kick one off here for you, Dave. There's some questions around add-ons, and is there anything that they should look to avoid or any gotchas that they should be aware of?
Guys. So yeah, there's a few things. This is obviously not fully baked. That's why it's a developer preview. Our goal is eventually is to be able to serialize and deserialize FileMaker files with about like 99.9% fidelity. So we're not there yet. There are some things you might see that are missing. So what you want to do when you develop your add-on is use the save a copy as XML menu item under the tools menu, or use the script step that Todd had mentioned, and then examine the XML, because basically what happens, and I think you saw Todd's demo, was that when you create your add-on, what's actually being created is a bunch of XML files. And so you can look at that to make sure that the options or the features you created are in there. If they're not, then that's something we're working on, and obviously you can feel free to report it. Some things that aren't supported right now: file options. So when you have your add-on file, we're not going to serialize out any of the file options for it. Same thing with security. As Todd had touched upon, we don't want to carry over any accounts or privilege sets, that kind of thing. So those won't show up in your add-on. The way we're doing this is with XML, and we're parsing the XML. So things are created in appearance order, and they get serialized out in creation order. So you want to make sure that your objects are basically referring to things that are already created at that time. There are some exceptions. Fields can refer to other fields and tables. Script steps can refer to other scripts. But you want to avoid circular dependencies if at all possible. And the last thing is, while you don't want your UUID of your add-on to conflict with some other add-on, this is especially something you want to watch out for if you have like a utility or an FMP12 file that you create multiple add-ons with. Each of those created add-ons should have a different UUID, and by default, they're based on the UUID of the actual FileMaker file, which is visible in the security interface in Pro.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. So a couple of questions that I'll tackle here. So the first is, why is Todd and Geist Interactive providing docs instead of it coming directly from Claris? And Todd sort of touched on this. What we're really trying to do is get things into market as quickly as possible so that we can start gaining feedback and, again, drive better outcomes for those features. And so when we were working very closely with Geist and creating the JavaScript integration and working with them on the add-ons, they had built up a lot of expertise on trying to create the JavaScript-based add-ons that I had just mentioned. So they had sort of organically been building their own documentation. So when we were looking at this and saying we want to get this script step out there as a developer preview, it made a lot of sense to leverage what Todd and Jeremy had learned along the way and had them publish them. We will be putting our own official documentation out. And as I just mentioned, we're working on a new guided add-on experience that we build into the product. So you're going to see this kind of stuff coming from us, where we get stuff out there that's not as fully baked as you would see in the past, and by that I mean, with full documentation and all. These are things that we still test. So this script step that's in developer preview is tested and validated. We know that it's not going to break anything, but it's really those supporting elements around it that weren't fully fleshed out like we would in the past. We think this is really great, though, for getting that early feedback so that we can much more rapidly deliver our ultimate vision. There's another question here that I'll also take. That's, will there be some way to support all the files that come with JavaScript add-ons? So things like HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript itself. And so right now, what you see from the add-ons that Todd was demoing, there's actually a utility table that they're using where they're storing all of that information. We don't want to do that long-term because, of course, that means that we're adding a table to your schema that you then have to manage. Our ultimate vision for this is another way to store all of the JavaScript, HTML, any of those supporting files or configuration settings in another location. So we haven't finalized exactly how we're tackling that, but that is part of our roadmap. There was a question here that I'll direct at you, Todd. How's the support and performance for JavaScript frameworks such as React in these JavaScript integrations?
It's actually quite good. So the add-ons that we built as part of this process using JavaScript are all based on React. So anything that you see in the future coming, those add-ons that Robert talked about, those were all built with React. Now, we just chose React because that's what we use. And it also has a lot of tooling around building things and compiling things down to a single blob of text, which we can put in a field, basically, and also transpiling it down to work in Internet Explorer 11. So pretty much any modern framework is going to work with the web viewers. The only thing you may still have to do is, again, make sure that when you are building the final versions, whether it's with React or Svelte or Angular or Vue, whatever, that you are compiling or transpiling it to work with Internet Explorer 11. But yeah, we use React and we've kind of standardized on that. In fact, we have a starter template which you can use if you're into React. We have a starter template you can use to get you up and running very quickly, and we'll make sure that gets into the show notes, as it were.
Hey, Jeremy, maybe this is one for you. There's a lot of questions around, how do I learn JavaScript? Is there any resources that I should look at? Are there ways to look at the JavaScript add-ons to learn JavaScript? Could you speak a little bit about your guidance? You've been learning JavaScript over the last couple of years. What lessons have you learned that you could share with the community? Also, you're on mute.
The JavaScript add-ons that are part of the platform are not good to learn JavaScript. It's a bundled code. It's in a field. And it's just there to minimize size and just get it into the web viewer. So that's not a good place to learn JavaScript, but there are great ways to learn JavaScript. I am on a JavaScript learning path right now. I've found developers to learn in JavaScript. I don't think we need to know everything about JavaScript at the outset, but we can do a lot. We can be successful in our work in FileMaker and JavaScript if we learn a little bit about JavaScript. And we've definitely got some resources, and we have some ideas about the best path for a FileMaker developer to take. And I think those are, Todd may have linked to those, or we'll make sure in the links there. So the process is just, playing with it and struggling with it. Libraries are very easy to work with because they're plug and play almost. You change a few options and you're ready to go. But if you want to write something from scratch using JavaScript, then you're going to need to learn a few things, and I've got ideas about what those could be.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. This next, I guess either you or Todd could answer, but as you've been developing the add-ons, the JavaScript integration, do you have any words of wisdom as far as gotchas or strategies of doing things like debugging the JavaScript that's running in a web viewer? Todd, you want to
Yeah,
lead us on that one?
Am I unmuted? I think I am. So real quickly, debugging is you can use the same web tools on the Mac. Another reason why we'd like to get rid of Internet Explorer is that we don't have the ability to do real good debugging on Windows. But on the Mac, you can use the same web development debugging tools that you can when you're doing web development. And Beeswax actually has a blog post on that, and we link to it. That's our reference go-to to how to turn that on. And so that is, again, on part of the links that we're showing, that we showed at the end of the session, will get you to all of that stuff on how to do that. So that's a big one. And so typically what we do is we'll debug and we'll write the core of the code on Mac because that's easiest, and then we move and test on Windows. One of the other things, a really simple little gotcha is that I learned is when you're doing date functions, if you use passing dates back and forth between FileMaker and web viewers, which you kind of want to do if you're building calendars, there's a format of a date that works in FileMaker, which is separated by the plus symbol. So 2020 plus the month plus the day. That is really great because it works across all international languages in FileMaker. So that is a valid date field, a valid date string in FileMaker, and it's very easy to parse and work with in JavaScript. So that's actually one that got me, and I was taught that. It's pretty cool. Other than that, it's basic debugging skills in JavaScript. I think you can get a long way. Like if you looked at the data tables integration that I did there, that is pretty simple, and that's a good way to get started, just to kind of play with that and see what you can do. I don't know, Jeremy might have some other ideas.
Looks like Jeremy, you're muted if you're trying to talk. Jeremy, we only heard you for a second there. Looks like you're still muted.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay, that's how I have learned JavaScript. I started by picking up the data tables library a long time ago and just playing with options in a web viewer with the code in a field to see what breaks the integration. I always would forget commas. I would always forget important things like that. But that was how I got into it, and I was able to. So I like to have my field with the code on one side and the JavaScript or the web viewer on the other side, break the other.
Awesome. So we're almost out of time. A couple really quick questions. Todd, this is one for you. Are there any factors to consider when trying to determine whether we use the execute SQL script step versus the execute FileMaker data API script step? Do you have any insight on that? So
for me, it comes down to, even in our FileMaker-based apps, we're using JSON. Whether it's FileMaker, pure FileMaker, whether it's talking to an API, talking to a widget, an add-on running on the screen, we're using JSON. So for me, that's kind of the final deciding factor. We do use execute SQL, but typically it's just for like picking up single fields from a table, like maybe getting, the name of something based on its ID or something like that. But in terms of data gathering, this is really going to be the best option for you. Whether or not you're going to be sending that data to an API or sending it to a widget or to a JavaScript add-on, I think the execute data API is just going to be easier. It gives you it gives you more options as far as like sorting and querying. That's much more similar to the way that you would do it in the data API on the server. The other nice thing is that it's almost exactly the same as what you would do if you're going to be connecting through the data API. So if you're writing, let's say, some kind of an add-on or a widget that you want to work in both a regular web app, because you have some public-facing web app that's connected to your FileMaker database, and as an embedded widget, well, it's really nice to be able to use the same format to do that. So I know there's a lot of Execute SQL fans out there, and we did actually think really hard about having an option for Execute SQL to return JSON as an option, but it just turned out to not be the thing that we could do quickly. Since the data API engine was already in the application, just sitting there waiting to be used, that was the route that we chose to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. So one real quick question I'll answer. There was a question of whether add-ons are supported for FileMaker 18, since they're still rolling out 19. So the installation of add-ons will only be supported in 19, but once they're installed, the functionality, assuming you're not using new 19 features, would still work. So if you had a mixed environment there. But with that, we had a ton of questions. We really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you for joining us in our first virtual session of the day. I hope you come back and join myself and a panel of experts at 12, talking to you about how the integration of JavaScript and add-ons is going to be changing everything in our upcoming panel, Add-ons, an open platform. This changes everything. So thank you, and I will see you all very soon.